Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my channel's weekly compendium for the week ending Monday, December 13th, 2021. Case file number 431, written by Large Marge in Charge. The Colossal Cookie Coincidence. Alright, I lived in Argentina with a fellow group of North Americans. There were 6 of us. Well, I had been there about 6 months, and while I love the culture and food, you start to miss stupid little things, mostly because they are impossible to acquire, especially in Argentina, as they have a strict no-import law. But here we are one hot, humid summer day in our little shack of a house with no air conditioner, and I just couldn't get over this craving I had been having for a few days. It was for those stupid little Keebler elf fudge cookies. You know, the ones that look like a little elf in reverse Oreo style. So I'm just sitting here, thinking about these cookies, man. And here's where it gets weird. We all worked in the same office, and in Argentina, you just don't get stuff by mail often, and never stuff from out of the country. You had to go into the city and pick them up at customs. I was the guy that did that. The only guy. Well, we had just finished lunch when the mailman came by with a package from my friend, who was sitting next to me. And the other guy who received the packages comes in and hands it to him, which is again super weird, it even showed up. And here's the thing, it was so impossible to get those cookies. I never even mentioned it to anyone, but he opens the package in a microwave oven-sized brown box. And what is on the very top of that package uncovered? The cookies! He had no idea I wanted them so much, but he grabs the cookies and looks up with a smile and says, "You guys want some?" I still can't believe it. Not only should this have never happened, but it would have taken 4 to 6 weeks to arrive if I asked for some from the US. Case notes, file number 431. Okay, I have to admit, stories like this and other occurrences from my own life lead me down the path of thinking more that life is a grand game. I've spoken about this hypothesis a few times in referencing explanations to other types of glitches. For instance, quantum immortality would be the act of transferring our character data to another server. Then we have instances where in our own lives, things that shouldn't fit and fall into place just do, for whatever reason. If you think back on it, you realize, hey, what the hell? Everything went right as rain, and the odds of that are astronomical. Sure, coincidence. Maybe there's nothing here besides the phenomenal luck of the cookie draw, but my gut says yeah. You, for some reason, needed to have those cookies so the game of life would continue along the path it should have. Case file number 432, written by Ziggy the Pineapple. Hairnets in coffee mugs. What a weird timeline. Items randomly appear in the apartment with no reasonable explanation. My girlfriend and I recently moved into a new apartment, just a little shy of 2 months ago. Weird things have happened since the beginning here, like stove dials and sinks being left on. But most of this can be explained, since we both tend to forget turning things on and off from time to time. But today was different. Today, while getting ready to go out for dinner, my girlfriend noticed something in our bathroom. She has a coffee mug that she uses to keep her hair elastics in. Other than a few bobby pins, the only thing that is ever in this cup is hair elastics. But today, as she was getting ready, she noticed that there were 2 perfectly intact hairnets in the mug as well. There is absolutely no reasonable explanation as to why these hairnets would be in the mug. Neither one of us uses hairnets. The only time she has ever used a hairnet is for when she used to dance, and that was over 8 years ago now. Plus, she uses that coffee mug every day, and I've even seen her use it and wash it since we moved here. I have absolutely no idea how something like this could have happened. I would almost be comfortable with the idea of an intruder, but how would an intruder know exactly where in our bathroom cupboard to put something as specific as a hairnet in my girlfriend's hair elastics mug? It all just seems way too odd. Case file number 433, written by Chordzi, an aircraft frozen in time. In my early 20s, I was walking to work one morning. It was a clear morning in spring, with my headphones on listening to music. Poodling around, minding my own business. I turn a corner, look up, and see a huge passenger plane flying low. It was so low you could see the windows. Planes make a lot of noise, and that noise would be heard over my headphones. This was in the days before any noise-canceling headphones. My headphones were good, but not that good. So I take off my headphones, and that plane was silent. It was just hovering, maybe 100 or so feet off the ground. My distance approximations aren't great. I was weirded out but kept walking, otherwise I would have been late for work. I lived and worked in a village in the middle of nowhere, in England at the time, so being about 8 AM, there wasn't anyone around. I was so freaked out I put my headphones back on and kept walking, trying to ignore this impossibility. Every time I speak about this, people don't believe me, but it was one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced. Wish I'd taken my phone out and taken a picture, but I was so miffed by the whole experience I never thought to do so. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Case file number 434, written by Hopeful Ladybug. Keys open doors, but who was controlling this key? So a few days ago, my keys were stolen after I forgot them on my front door. Not smart, I know. I came back home from a doctor's appointment and probably got distracted and forgot them in the lock. Around 6 PM that day, I decided to go get some groceries and couldn't find my keys. I spent almost an hour looking for them before thinking maybe they were stolen. I decided to call my landlord and he told me there were some random guys in the building the entire afternoon. It was too late already for him to get a new lock, so he told me he'd be there the next morning at 8 AM to change a lock. I obviously didn't feel safe knowing someone had my key, but I knew the door couldn't be opened if I kept my spare key in the lock from the inside. So that night, I carefully put the key in the lock before going to bed. I know I did, because it was the only way I could sleep safely. Otherwise, someone could have literally walked in. They had the keys to the 3 locks on my door. I put the key in the main lock, the one that really allows you to open the door, and locked the other 2. My bedroom door is in the hallway about 2 meters from the door, and if someone walks in, I can hear it. The door makes a lot of noise when you open it, so I would have heard if someone tried to come in. I fell asleep around 3 AM, was a little anxious, and woke up at 7:45 AM to wait for my landlord. He showed up at 8:15, and when I went to open the door, the 2 locks were closed, but the spare key I used was outside the door. At first I shrugged it off and didn't think much of it, but then I realized, how on earth did this happen? My landlord changed the other 2 locks, but not the main one that day. It's still safe, don't worry. So later, I asked a friend to come in and help me check if you can open the door when the key is left in the lock from the inside, and it's not possible, as I thought. I have no idea how the key ended up back outside. My other key is definitely lost because I've been searching for them ever since. My place isn't really big, and I don't have much clutter or potential places they could be. So yeah, I don't know what happened, but it was really weird. Bonus file, written by Frazier P. A Paranormally Murdered Guide. When I was young, I wanted to buy a Ouija board to play around with friends. However, when I went to grab one at the store one day with my mom, she strictly advised me against it. I found it odd that she was so provoked by the idea of it, but I didn't think too much of it beyond this. A few years later, when we were on holiday in Hawaii, the topic came up and she told us the story of her experience with one. When my mom was little, maybe 8 or 9 years old, her and her friends were messing around with one. They began talking to a girl who claimed to have been murdered. As the conversation went on, they learned she had been killed by her boyfriend and that her body had been dumped under a bridge near where she lived in England. They decided to visit the site, not thinking they would find anything, but when they got to the bridge, they were shocked to find a murdered woman next to the bridge. When the police interviewed my mom and her friends, they simply did not believe the story and thought somehow they were involved with the murder. However, when the boyfriend was in fact proven guilty, the whole scenario was deemed a coincidence. Case file number 435, written by Ahedrich 62985. Missing items? Old news. Now we have missing organs. When my husband and I found out I was pregnant with baby number 2, we were surprised but overjoyed. It had taken us a while and lots of scans to get pregnant with number 1, so not needing the intervention with 2 was relieving. We did, however, decide that number 2 would be our only other child, so I opted for a C-section to get my tubes tied as well. The pregnancy was normal. I had normal scans, everything went great. At 37 weeks, I went into labor and was taken for my C-section. My beautiful baby girl arrived and the doctor went to tie my tubes. However, there was only one fallopian tube. When did you have surgery to remove your right fallopian tube? He asked. Never, I replied. Even scans during this pregnancy showed both of my fallopian tubes intact. Miss, your right fallopian tube was surgically removed. There is scar tissue and everything from a clear surgical procedure. My doctor was baffled. He searched through all of my medical records and could not find a reason for my fallopian tube to be gone. I did not have any surgery between that scan and the C-section, so there was legitimately no reason for it to not be there. He insisted it was clearly a past medical procedure due to the nature of the scar tissue, but could not explain how or when. Needless to say, only one tube ended up tied because the other one had been clearly removed. To this day, it gives me the chills. I truly have no explanation for it. Case notes, file number 435. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't believe this was a disappearing object phenomena, even though technically any matter, organic or not, should be fair game for that effect to occur on. I wouldn't discount DOP as a possibility, but the fact your doctor kept referring to highly specific and distinctive scar tissue makes me think of only two possibilities. So the mundane possibility, during the brief gap during your last scan and giving birth to your little girl, you were somehow drugged, abducted by some kind of cartel that surgically harvested your fallopian tube, but only one, then put you right back where you were before they abducted you, with no one the wiser, including yourself. Also note that any drug that would cause you to lose consciousness would have heavy lingering effects, unlike the movies would show. In fact, the people responsible for putting you under, an anesthesiologist, they're highly paid because it's a dangerous practice and not at all as easy as the movies would have you believe. Or, let's bring out the aliens, baby. Seriously though, it's the only clear explanation in my mind. Presumably, aliens would still require tools and surgery to remove matter from a human body, without killing them at least, and then scar tissue would form, no matter how sharp or precise an instrument is. Only an alien abduction could be done so cleanly in the limited time with no one noticing, not even yourself. I wouldn't be too scared though. I don't think they'd be coming back. If this is in fact what happened, they already took what they wanted. But why on earth would they want a human fallopian tube? Are these aliens trying to create a human hybrid? Ooh, this is getting very weird. Bonus file, written by Anonymous. A flash, then a pool of floating milk. I don't know if this was paranormal. I tend to think that it was because there's no explanation for it that I can think of. But anyway, here goes. By the way, I never told this to anyone because I think that people would think we are insane. I still think that you guys probably still will, but it's something extra weird, to me at least, and should be told. So be it. This was in the late 2000s. I don't remember exactly the year, and it happened to my then wife and myself in our home. We lived in a nice quiet area. Our home was at the end of a road. In front of our house, there was obviously a road. On each side, we had neighbors whose homes were anywhere from 50 to 100 feet away. On the back of the house, it was woods for miles and miles. We used to love seeing all the wildlife that would enter our property at one time or another. But as I said, the biggest plus was how peaceful it was. It was wintertime in southern Massachusetts, a cloudy night but no storms, and it was around 11:30 at night. We were in our living room just watching some movies. I was relaxing on an easy chair, lazy boy style. My wife was sitting on a small couch about 6 feet from me. There was no noise but for the movie going on, and all of a sudden there was a flash. Everything went all white for a tiny fraction of a second, like all you could see was just the color white. And when that was over, really quickly as you may imagine, something was very different. You see, that room was a really huge addition that the house's previous owners had done, I guess sometime in the 90s. They built that and a sizable deck outside. The room was very large and had cathedral ceilings, which at its top must easily have reached 15 feet. This is a guess, I don't know for sure. It looked like it would go up forever. On the ceiling, there were a bunch of small lights and a skylight. Being nighttime, the skylight looked like a black square and the lights were providing great illumination, courtesy of a dimmer, The lights were just right, not too strong, not too weak. Well, right after that flash had gone, I looked up at the ceiling and what I saw froze me in place. Gone were the lights, gone was the square skylight that was dark because it was night. Starting from about 7 feet up from the floor, yes, we had stood up and could easily have touched it, there was what looked like an inverted, as an upside down, pool of what looked like, for the lack of better words, milk. But it had a strange glow to itself. I watched, fascinated, as this white stuff rippled gently with small waves, like it really was a thick liquid. My mind was horrified and curious at the same time because I couldn't think of any phenomenon that could have caused what I'm seeing. A pool of glowing milk, lazily rippling, suspended above our heads. I immediately thought that I must have imagined that, and to get confirmation that I wasn't having some medical emergency that made me see things, I looked at my wife who was on the couch. She was staring up at the same thing, with her mouth open. All of a sudden, in another flash and in the blink of an eye, that pool of white stuff wasn't there any longer. It had lasted maybe 10 seconds, and everything had gone back to normal. My wife turned to look at me wild-eyed, and I said, "Did you just see that?" And she said, "Yes." I asked her what she thought it was, and she said she had no idea. I dabbled with the idea that this was somehow some odd lightning thing, but there wasn't any storm, and I'm not aware of any natural phenomenon with these characteristics. Nothing was damaged. In that room, there was a good deal of electronics, and what we saw looked damn solid. As I said, the consistency and look of regular milk. I remember thinking that the ripples and waves I was seeing in that stuff were something that, had they hit your body, you'd have really felt them. It felt like whatever this was, it had substance. In any case, this really spooked me, big time. Case notes, bonus file. Okay, so not very much to say on this, besides that it's an absolutely fascinating read, and a glitch unlike any I've ever read before. All I can say is that the one thing that pops into my head when reading this is fluidic space in Star Trek Voyager. There's this other species that's in another dimension, not a parallel universe, but another dimension, a layer above, and in their universe, the very space itself has a fluidity to it. There is mass in it. So it's almost like you had a perception of a higher level dimension, where in it, you could visualize and see there's this milky white essence to the very nature of space-time itself in this dimension. I don't know if that's at all what happened, but that is what my mind was going to when I read this. Truly fascinating. Bonus file, written by Raspberry Waterfall. Santa Claus paying a visit. Maybe evil Santa. When I was 8 or 9, I saw something weird on Christmas Eve. This was many, many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still believed in Santa Claus then, as a good amount of children do, and I had the usual anxiety and excitement for Santa to leave Christmas presents under the tree. After I went to bed, I had some trouble going to sleep with holiday nerves and such. I had finally drifted off, when I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps somewhere in my room. I automatically assumed it was Santa Claus, and I was scared to see him, for fear that he might leave or his magic would fail. I opened one eye just barely and saw this black figure standing over my bed staring at me. It was tall, probably around 6 feet tall, and it was completely dark. In a way, it looked almost blacker than even black itself could describe. I couldn't see any eyes, a mouth, or a nose on it, but I could clearly see the outline of a head, arms, body, and legs. It looked like a bigger person, so thinking it was Santa just made sense. It stayed in one spot for 10, maybe 15 seconds, until it took a few steps closer. It leaned in a little more, still a few feet away from me, and then stayed there for 10 to 15 seconds more. Even though I couldn't see a face, I knew it was looking right at me. It's just that weird feeling you get when you know you're being watched or looked at. I closed my eyes again and waited for a few minutes. When I looked back, it was gone. I lived in a pretty old house at the time, so the doors and floorboards were squeaky and loud. I heard footsteps, but I never heard the door open. I never saw this figure again, though I've had some other spooky experiences in this house. I asked my mom if she heard Santa when he came into my room last night, and she looked confused for a second. Then she played along and just assumed I was lying, or that my imagination was on hyperdrive. I know this wasn't a person, and I know this wasn't a dream. I also know that spirits and entities are often attracted to lots of excitement and energy, so Christmas would be a perfect time for a ghost to pass through. Case file number 436, written by Breadspace3. There was me, and then there was me. I grew up in a very small, rural, yet scenic town. You know, the kind that lays dormant until warm weather brings cottagers and tourists. That summer, I was 18. I was involved with a guy, we'll call him Jack, who had a lake house nearby. I'm 22 now, and I haven't seen him since. The summer I was 20, I lived and worked in the city I'd moved to for college. I avoided my hometown, which was 3 hours away by car, at the time, only going back briefly that year for Christmas. But one day, I got a random text from Jack. "Hey, it was so great catching up with you today. I'd love to hang out sometime like you suggested. When did you say you were off?" It took a while to explain to him that I hadn't spent more than 72 consecutive hours in that town in almost a year. Apparently, I had called his name back when he called mine from across the street. We'd talked about the old days, and I'd given him a brief life update, and what I had said about what I was up to these days included some information that he had no way of knowing. For the record, this wasn't the only time someone claimed to have seen me in my hometown when I was gone. It's just the most memorable. Case notes, file number 436. Right, so the first quick gut draw in this analysis of the story is that it would be a doppelganger. But of all the stories I've read of doppelgangers, almost all of them always appear to be near the one they're impersonating, usually to cause them distress or even direct harm. If they have any motive, it's to be creepy. No, I chalk this up to another instance of astral projection, especially given that this has occurred multiple times and no one who interacted with the other you ever noticed anything off. Doppelgangers give off a vibe, almost like an uncanny valley spookiness. You know when it's a doppelganger. Bonus file, written by Avini. My Bald Cat, the Superior Demon. I encountered a haunted apartment for the first time in my life. I started officially dating my now boyfriend at the end of May 2021, but before that, we practically have been in a relationship for a few weeks. During that time, I would occasionally spend time at his apartment, and he would come over to mine. Everything was totally fine, except for the fact that I could not sleep properly in his flat. I thought it was only because it's a new place for me, and I simply wasn't comfortable enough yet. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened during a time when we're not official. After the day when I agreed to date him, I went over to his apartment to stay the night, just like I usually did. That night, I could not fall asleep because of fear I had never experienced before. I was sleeping on the side of the bed that faced the hallway. The door was never closed because his dog needs to walk around the apartment. She sometimes loves to eat in the middle of the night or just lay on the cold floor when it gets hot. That night, I constantly felt like something was watching me from the hallway. Something that clearly didn't want me to be there. Something evil. After that, I thought that I was just stressed out and not used to the new place. And that, my friends, was just the start. Each time I would spend the night, it would get worse and worse. The fear was getting worse, and the only time I felt safe enough to fall asleep was either when my boyfriend was still awake or after the sunrise. I was watched more and more, and every day I felt like some scary creep wanted me gone as soon as possible. After 2 weeks or so, I was scared to death to even use the bathroom at night. I was scared to pull my blanket and look at the hallway. During that time, I noticed that his dog would never leave the room at night, which was really strange. She would stare at the hallway, get up from her sofa, bark at something, and then run back. She was visibly scared and uncomfortable, and her usual way of sleeping changed drastically. Cherry went from being a chill dog who snored quietly to someone constantly moaning in her sleep while constantly moving around as if she was having nightmares. One night when my boyfriend was not asleep, I went to the bathroom, which has tempered glass on the door. You could see someone passing by, but it would just be a silhouette. As I was doing my business there, I saw a very tall shadow go back and forth a few times. It was clearly not the dog, and it looked too tall to be my boyfriend, but I brushed it off and went back to the room. My boyfriend was laying on the bed, peacefully dozing off while watching something on the phone. I asked him why he got up, and he was very confused. After I told him that I saw someone wandering around the hallway, he looked freaked out. He said that he always knew that something evil lives here, and then described the exact same thing I saw. He told me about his previous experience with an overwhelming sense of fear and the way he felt being watched all the time. It happened occasionally, so he managed to ignore it most of the time. Just to clarify, I never told him about these things, so everything he told me freaked me out even more. When I was home, I got enough sleep so that I was pretty much full energy. But as soon as I entered his apartment, I felt extremely tired to the point where I could barely keep my eyes open. Then I started getting very emotionally unstable, having weird meltdowns that came from nowhere. It instantly stopped when I got out of the apartment. My things like perfumes would fall from the shelf randomly. One of my favorite ones fell down into the soft pile of clothes and shattered, which seemed very strange. My boyfriend started having work-related and financial issues that took him by surprise because everything was fine before. The strangest thing we've noticed is that all of those creepy things only happened when I was in the apartment. As soon as I'd left, everything was going back to normal. He didn't feel scared or watched anymore. When I came back, it all started again. After a week, I would get the same feeling in my apartment, being watched, scared to death, being unwelcome in my own home. That thing seemed to have followed me. Every single night became unbearable. If I managed to fall asleep, I would wake up from a terrible nightmare. I was scared of turning the lights off, just like in my boyfriend's apartment. I felt like I was going insane. When I told my boyfriend about this, he was even more terrified because it seemed like that creature, whatever it was able to leave the apartment and follow a person it wanted to leave. One day, we were searching the apartment, checking every corner for strange things. In Ukraine, many people are religious, so they believe in some sort of black magic and didn't find anything. However, we saw glue residue above the door to our room, over the entrance to the hallway, and over the entrance to the kitchen. When he moved to this place, he noticed that previous owners left their icons, the ones with Jesus and his holy friends, but he shrugged it off. When we checked them that day, we also noticed some sticky tape residue. It looked as if previous owners hung them in order to keep that scary crap trapped in the hallway. After going through the apartment, we realized that our fear got much worse when we stood in the middle of the hallway facing the bathroom and the restroom doors. They are separated in older buildings. We pretty much found the source of our horror's liver. It was right in the middle of those two doors. That night, I got back home, and my boyfriend texted me that he will hang one of the icons right above those doors because our people believe that these things will protect you from any type of cursed and scary crap. A few minutes later, he calls me and says that as soon as he touched the icon, he felt extremely sick to his stomach and scared like he's never been before. His phone lost the signal and the Wi-Fi stopped working as well. He was terrified, but still decided to put the icon up. After a couple of days, things were starting to get better. We didn't feel scared and watched anymore, but would still get chills randomly. The dog was able to leave the room during the night, but still seemed a bit worried. I decided to move in with him in July because it felt pretty safe at that point. Weird occasional chills aside. When I brought my cat there, everything stopped completely. She's bald and suspicious looking, so I think that evil thing mistook her for a more superior demon. To this day, we have no clue what happened and why that thing wanted to get rid of me so badly. The icon is still in the hallway, and we live a peaceful life now. Case file number 437, written by Paper Tiger. Emergency nail clippers missing. To start, I spend a lot of time at my desk. I mean a lot, especially over the past couple years, and taking online classes and generally having nothing else to do. I pretty much sit here for an extended period of time every single day. I also have a particular thing where I cannot stand the feeling of having long fingernails or even having my nails extend past my fingertips. If I don't have nail clippers on hand, whenever I get the urge to shorten them, I pick at them subconsciously until they're a mess. so I always try to have a pair accessible. With that said, I've kept a pair of nail clippers in my right desk drawer for as long as I can remember, switching them out when they get dull and whatnot, so I can quickly just reach in and fix my nails without having to pick at them. I'm a little bit obsessive about my nails, so I'd say I'd probably use them at least several times a week, and since I'm always sitting at my desk when I use them, I always put them right back in the drawer when I'm done. One day, sometime in the past couple of months, I noticed my nails getting longer than my liking, so I reached into my drawer only to find that the clippers just weren't there. I thought maybe I'd left them sitting on the surface of the desk, or maybe I'd put them in the other drawer, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find them for anything. I asked my fiance if he'd seen them or knew where they were, and he said he didn't touch them. Finally, I got up to see if maybe they'd fallen on the floor somewhere, or I'd taken them to the bedside table and just didn't remember doing it. But they were seriously nowhere to be found, so basically I just gave up and resigned myself to buy a new pair the next time I went to the store. I remember the next few days really sucked because I could feel my nails getting longer and I had no way of trimming them, so I just stuck it out and tried to resist the urge to pick at them. One day, as I'm just sitting there, minding my own business, probably watching something on YouTube or playing a game, I don't know, I suddenly just became aware of the fact that my lost nail clippers were just sitting right there in front of me on my desk, right in front of my keyboard. I didn't see them materialize or anything. It was more along the lines of literally just becoming aware of their existence. I know for a fact that they hadn't been on my desk the whole time because I searched pretty thoroughly the moment I realized that they were missing, and yet here they were, front and center on my desk. I showed it to my fiance and he thought it was really weird too, and we were both pretty much just scratching our heads at that point. Weird things like this seem to happen to me all my life, but this was the most recent and prominent instance of something disappearing and reappearing randomly. Wondering if something just likes messing with me or if it's actually returning my lost stuff. Case notes. I too am obsessed with keeping my nails neatly trimmed because I pick at them too if they aren't. They can get jagged, which is awkward whenever handling clothing. So you're not alone in that little tick, nor are you alone in having an object disappear and then reappear on you. Your experience is more unique in the way it returned, in plain sight. I find how you described it very intriguing. Not like the nail clippers popped back into existence, but as if your mind was literally not allowed to process their existence. Then a switch was flipped, and you were made aware of them again. Almost like they were always there, but the programming wasn't coded to enable interaction. Bonus file, written by Cheap Squealer, The Ghost Bouquet. Hi everyone. To introduce myself and give a bit of context, I am a French wedding photographer and I've worked mainly along the Atlantic coast. I'm 32 years old and have about 170 wedding reportages completed. I'm not a strong believer in the paranormal, although I am very interested in the subject. It's something very far from my mind when I am working on a wedding report. However, as I read more stories, I began to rethink my personal experiences, most of which took place in the course of my work during weddings. The Ghost Bouquet. The first memory that came to me is quite recent. In October 2021, I had a wedding in a castle, and there had been a small incident at the start of the day because the bridal bouquet had been forgotten, or in all was nowhere to be found. The bride had to make her wedding without it. The next day, I started the selection of the photos on my computer at the time of the exit of the ceremony, where the couple went up the aisle among the guests. I was at the back of the room and I took photos of them facing me. There is a series of 8 photos taken from this moment, and on only one of them, the bride is holding a bouquet. On the 7 other photos, she has her hands totally empty. At the time, I didn't ask myself any more questions about this and joined this photo to the bride and groom in the selection. The bride phoned me almost immediately, completely taken aback, and asked if I had photoshopped her bouquet in her hands. Obviously, I said no, since I had never seen it anyway and therefore never had a picture of it. Her reaction made me realize how strange this little detail I hadn't really noticed before was when I thought about it. It's bouquet, why on only one of the 8 photos when they were taken in a burst, so less than a second apart between each. Because the bride did recognize her bouquet, it was by no means another bouquet taken from the floral decoration. She also assured me that she was empty-handed during the moment. The discussion remained on hold, where no one had any explanation and where to bring up anything supernatural would have been totally inappropriate of me. Kid's disappearance. Another equally strange story from a few years ago. The cocktail was in a large room because it was raining all day. At a certain point, a person started to panic because their son was missing. Little by little, all the guests started to look for him. Searching every nook and cranny of the reception hall, which was relatively empty of hiding places, the kid was nowhere to be found. A few men even left in the rain to see if he hadn't had the idea of going out despite the bad weather, but nothing. I would like to point out that the room had no particular nook or long tablecloths on the tables, absolutely no place a child could have been hiding. After about 20 minutes, I heard exclamations in the middle of the room where a crowd was gathering. The child was sitting idly on the chair in the middle of the room, absorbed in his portable console, as if he had always been there. His parents asked him where he had been, and the kid didn't seem to understand a word of the situation. He explained that he hadn't moved from his chair right in the middle of the room and hadn't seen or heard the panic and calls while the 120 guests were looking for him. On the other hand, 120 people did not see him in his chair for 20 minutes when he was theoretically in plain sight. Having been involved in the search as well, I'm pretty sure the kid wasn't where he reappeared. Again, a weird moment. Babies crying. One last, shorter anecdote to finish. During a wedding mass, church celebration, there was, as often, a baby screaming in the audience. The French churches, very large and made of nude stone, made the sounds particularly resonate, and the tears of the babies crying was frankly annoying. Being the only one who could move around mass, I looked a little annoyed at where the cries were coming from. There were not many guests, 60 people maximum, and the screaming baby could not be located. When going to the back, the crying seemed to come from the front and vice versa, and when I moved, it always seemed to come from somewhere else. People didn't seem to particularly look for the source of the noise, but I could see they were just as annoyed as I was, as were the priest and the bride and groom. As I walked out of the church, I watched carefully to see if any guests were going out with a baby, and none seemed to have any, either at this time or throughout the wedding day. Case notes. So the first story about the ghost bouquet has me most intrigued. My guess is it would be a spirit or entity that had been scheduled to get married herself, but died suddenly and wanted to relive the magic in any way she can. But of course, that's unfinished business that just cannot be solved. Very sad if that's the case.